Hey guys, this is James with thegraymattersblog.com coming to you on another one of my walks through the beautiful South Texas woods. Today I'm going to be bringing you another installment of Witcher Man and the Case of the Wolf That Wasn't. To recap a little bit on our last installment, Daniel the Witcher Man, who is a supernatural detective, was sitting in his office when he was hired by a werewolf to investigate a murder that was being pinned on the local pack. We pick up with him getting ready to head out the door to check out the murder scene. I'll go ahead and read it to you and then we'll talk a little bit about it. The contents of the bag were pretty varied, considering the wide variety of magics I practiced. That's the sort of the defining characteristic of a Witcher man. I'm a magical generalist who studies everything from alchemy, shamanism, and druidism to demonology, necromancy, and blood magic. It's those so-called dark arts that give Witcher men their fearsome reputation. Even though the big bag of tricks magical style is what screams Witcher man to most people, it's not really what the job is all about. I learned to be a Witcher man from my father, and he taught me that what makes a Witcher man is being able to have an answer for any situation. It might not always be the best answer, but Witcher men always find a solution. That's why we are sort of the all-around problem solvers for the supernatural world. Sometimes it also means we're the last resort. I patted myself down, sure I was forgetting something. I tugged down my leather bomber jacket, making sure it concealed my shoulder holster. I kept my revolver loaded with some rounds of my own design. They were .357 Magnum with expanding tips, silver cores, and some etchings of my own design that were guaranteed to ruin the day of a few selected boojums. If I run into anything that needs more shooting than that, well, that's why I keep a customized shotgun in the back of my Mini. Its magazines are loaded with rounds of all types, from slugs and buckshot to silver, salt, and iron. Besides, bullets are just one of the tools in my toy box. Suddenly, my brain clicked. I grabbed the bag of fresh dead crickets out of the little office fridge to feed my spider. I had to make sure he kept up his strength. I had big plans for him. Grabbing a pair of shades from a rack by the door, I hopped in my car and sped into the dark. I sped into the dark Texas night. The next morning, the sun was just starting to peek over the trees to my east, gently spreading the morning light over my back seat. I sat cross-legged in the middle of my garden, running my hands through the soil, a thermos of coffee steaming on the ground beside me. I also had a gallon jug of blackstrap molasses. I let the cool morning mist of the living earth beneath my hands leach away the tension and help restore my zen. I'm not sure if there is an English word for the opposite of fun, but if there was, it would be used to describe root canals, prostate exams, and the night I'd just had. I'd started thinking the night wouldn't end until someone drove a stake through its heart, which is kind of ironic, all things considered. I had followed Damien to the crime scene to find it a hotbed of supernatural activity. Wolfgang was there in the middle of a heated argument with a vampire. As if that wasn't stereotypical enough, she was hot, female, and dressed in expensive black clothing. I also knew her to be the leader of the local vampires. At least she led the undead, blood-drinking, mind-trick variety. Yes, there are other kinds. Her name was Annabella, which is a pleasantly low on the gag me scale of vampire names, and she was berating Wolfgang. She insisted one of his people must be responsible because she could smell the wolf scent all over the body. He was loudly contesting that she had no place being involved, since this was his territory, and besides, she was obviously incompetent if she couldn't see this was obviously not a wolf kill. I all but crept by them on tiptoes, trying to get to the body without getting caught up in their pissing contest. Besides, that would be a contest Wolfgang would be having an unfair advantage in, for reasons of both species and equipment. I managed to get my examination of the body and scene complete with a minimum of molestation. I was starting to develop a theory as to what did this, and I didn't like it one bit. The conventional wisdom is to think horses, not zebra, but in my line of work, not only could it be zebras, they were likely to breathe fire. This was gonna be a zebra kind of job. I dug into my messenger bag, looking for a vial I had made up for just such an occasion. It contained a viscous concoction of oily liquids that smelled like a cross between camphor and fierce sweat. I took it out along with a long cotton swab, which I thickly coated in the victim's blood, then dropped into the vial. I swished the contents of the vial, watching as the liquid bubbled. It would take about a day, but based on how the color and consistency changed, it would give me a positive idea on the killer, or at least his species. Nodding to myself, I stood up, ready to make my escape, when I heard a female voice shout, "Witcher man!" I groaned deeply and turned around, all hope fleeing me forever. Anna had seen me, which was the point at which my night took a nosedive. I spent the rest of the night being batted back and forth between the two faction leaders like a shuttlecock. Anna wanted to know what I intended to do about the city's werewolf problem, while Wolfgang insisted continuously that I confirm definitively that his people had nothing to do with the matter. Caught between haughty vampiric condescension and admittedly classy werewolf bravado, I spent the rest of the night repeating in every way I could think of that I couldn't tell them anything for 24 hours. I said it so many times I was considering using different language. Before the night was over, I was about to pull out my phone and look up how to say it in Klingon. It was ridiculously late before I managed to extricate myself and make it home to gratefully collapse into my soft and wonderfully downy bed. Thankfully, a good night's sleep, even if it was too short, had washed away the monster politics and left me here in my favorite place in the world. After a year of real estate shopping and nearly murdering 2 agents, I found this land. I needed to be within an hour of Houston, where my office is located. I also wanted enough land so I wouldn't have too many neighbors to frighten. When my 3rd agent showed me this place just south of Pearland, it was so perfect that I decided to let him live. I now live in this wonderful old farmhouse sitting on 10 acres with a stream that runs through the northwest corner. I'm convinced the stream must be some kind of place of power, as it is the only natural body of water in all the swamps of South Texas that is actually clear. From where I sat in my garden, I could just barely hear it as it flowed through the 2 acres I had turned into my food forest. Given that I had only been on the land a few years, the trees should still be getting established, but since I cheat, the forest was already lush and full of deliciousness. This land is my home, and it's where I practice my druidic arts. Of all the magics I've studied, and I've studied most of them, druidry makes me the happiest. In its most basic form, druid magic lets you commune with living beings and communicate with them on their level. It's not like my orange trees can spy on humans for me, because without eyes, trees are ill-equipped to pay much attention to humans. Well, most trees anyway. On the other hand, they can tell me all about the acidity of the soil and let me know when the kiwi vines growing up them are taking too much of their sunlight. I can always give them some helpful nudges. By the stream, for instance, I have a Japanese pagoda tree whose trunk has grown a very convenient bench and whose shade is so thick it's almost as good as AC. My food forest is one of my masterpieces, completely full of edible and useful plants, all growing in harmony and creating a flowing web of life. The only time it really needs me is to harvest all the wonderful things it makes and occasionally negotiate with some of the local wildlife so they don't eat all my strawberries. The garden I set in was a different story. It's where I plant all my annuals, all those plants that have grown up with human help and need us in their systems. If my food forest is my iron bull that just keeps growing and doesn't need anyone, then this garden is my little glass butterfly. That's why it's so nice to sit with my fingers dug deep in the soil, feeling the life of the garden going about its business. Sometimes it's nice to be needed. As the morning sun washed over me and the garden, it filled the plants with the energy to grow strong and plentiful. At the same time, it filled me with peace. Unfortunately, the sound of a souped-up engine pulling into my driveway scattered the oneness with the universe I was cultivating. I closed my eyes, hoping vainly that if I ignored the situation, it might go away. As predicted, this tactic failed, and Damien came walking around the side of my house. He trudged across the yard and came into the garden. Luckily for him, he didn't trample any of my plants. He looked down at me quizzically. "Are you trying to sleep?" he asked, looking puzzled. "Nope," I responded. "Just trying to wish you away. Is it working?" For just a second, he looked concerned. "You can't actually do that, can you?" he asked, a tiny note of worry in his voice. Maybe it was the look in his eyes that suggested that just for a second he thought I might wish him into the cornfield. But that struck me as the funniest thing I've heard in my entire life. The result was me falling over on the ground in a paroxysm of laughter, almost knocking the bottle of molasses over. I finally managed to pick myself up, tears streaming down my face, and my heart much lighter than it had been. The look Damien gave me was one of utter disgust, of the kind you might reserve for something you find under a particularly dank, dark rock. He said, "If you're quite done being an insufferable jackass, Wolfgang sent me here to find out your results." I wiped my eyes, composing myself. All right, guys, that's where we're going to leave it off for today. I'm really enjoying actually getting to read this one. I've really enjoyed writing it. This is one of the very first things that I ever actually wrote and finished, at least that was a little bit longer. And there's a bunch of for one, I've come a long way as a writer. You know, going back and reading this, I look, oh my God, I can't believe I wrote this way. You know, this really needs to be improved. And actually, the entire Witcher Man series is going to be edited, improved, and put into a short story collection done with a whole lot better pacing, you know, all the lessons I've learned since then. One of the things I found out actually is that there's a thing with this spider, which I won't ruin for you, but the spider that's on his desk. And I've been assured by the first people who read it that it was kind of disappointing. And if you're familiar with Chekhov's gun, which means which is a saying about how you tell a story, that if there's a gun sitting on the wall in the first act, it has to go off in the third act. And that's called Chekhov's gun. And the fact that there is a spider, and it does go off, but not in a way that most people really expected, and they found kind of underwhelming, which is why that in the rewrite, the spider will be named Chekhov. It's, like I said, I still think it's pretty cool, but it's not like a major plot point, which I think everyone, since we stopped, pointed out. I felt like they thought it was going, or they've told me they thought it was going to be. And the entire thing, like I said, I really enjoy Witcher Man. It's going to be put all together. I'm reading this and I love the dialogue. I love where it all goes, but at the same time, I feel like, okay, that should have been paced differently. This scene should have gone before that scene. So it's really fun to go back to something I wrote so long ago and look at how I've changed as a writer and what kind of needs to be improved. I'd love to hear your thoughts below on when I do rewrite this. What would you like to see different? And I really thank you guys for listening. Make sure you give us a like and a subscribe. Make sure you visit us at thegraymattersblog.com. All those words, no capitalization. And check out everything we've done. You can read this. You can read the sequel to Witcher Man. Check us out on Facebook. And I'll check you guys on my next walk.